let's say you want to win the best trophy in all of professional sports. What should you do? Well, I've been watching a lot of Stanley Cup playoffs hockey lately, and well, let's just start here. Two teams are facing off, the Florida Panthers and the Edmonton Oilers. They've only played one game so far. One of the best ways to predict who's gonna win the Stanley Cup is which team has the most discipline. And of course, that can be interpreted so many different ways, but one of the best ways to interpret it is to think about, well, who as a team in aggregate has the most focus, right? When you think about it, focus is about saying no, right? It's about stepping up to the line but not crossing it, right? And so maybe it's about not taking penalties is one way of thinking about it, right? You end up with less time down, more time up, and you have a better chance of winning the series because of that. That's one way to think about discipline. Another way is thinking about making sure you're consistently going and skating hard, making your way into the corners, fighting for pucks, supporting your teammates, focusing on those things. That's another way of thinking about discipline. All of those pieces of discipline, though, are all about going up to the line and not crossing it, right? You want to push the boundaries of what that line are, open those windows, but make sure that you don't step too far over as to hurt your team. That's what today's Apple event was all about. Let me explain. One of my favorite lines ever on Gruber's blog at Daring Fireball is this: software demands more creative discipline than hardware because so much discipline is baked into the nature of creating hardware. Hardware instills discipline in people. People must instill discipline into software. The implication there is that it's much harder to be disciplined when it comes to software than it is to hardware. That's because it's not in the nature of software to be disciplined. The nature of software allows you to create or do anything with the tools that you have, as long as it fits within the lines. And so when I look at my notes here about the keynote, I start to ask myself about kind of my analysis of Apple as a company. I think I said in the last video that today would be a very good litmus test, a test of where the company is at, both in terms of technology, but also in terms of design, right? If you can think about Apple overall, the shift from Steve Jobs to Tim Cook was one more away from design, which was the complete center and heart of the company while Jobs was running it, to one that was more about scale and, frankly, a little bit about the more technology side of things. Not to say that Apple hasn't been high tech. So I kind of bucketed all of the announcements when it came to the Apple Intelligence into two big things: the good and the bad. I've also done this exercise when it came to other products. The Humane AI pen, the Rabbit R1, the Meta Ray-Ban glasses, Copilot, ChatGPT, Bing, Google, and Recall. I basically noted all of them in the bad column. I didn't think that there was a single good AI product out there. And so let's start with the bad with Apple. Pretty early on, I was ready to be impressed as they kind of made the transition into that second phase, talking about Apple Intelligence after they had talked about their platforms. They started talking about what was going on and what they were going to cover and some of their principles. And then they got to talking about personalized images. This looks like it's mostly a generative image that was based off of maybe people in your contacts, some of your photo library, but it still had that kind of like weird, ugly AI generated look to it. You know how all those images kind of end up with a look? So that was like, it was kind of pointing me in the direction of feeling like a little weird about what was going to happen. They then went back and talked about some features, which I'll get to when we get to the good column. And I was feeling actually pretty good. First of all, I think I predicted a lot what was going on very well, and that I think that this brings Apple to the forefront of the consumer AI space. But let's continue down the line with the bad. The other bad things that I think that were released, or at least not great, were the Image Wand, which is a new special tool, I think, when it comes to the Apple Pencil on the iPad, that lets you generate an image based off of a sketch or based off of the surrounding context, which is still better than some other things, but it still ends up with that weird AI-generated look to it. The image playground, which is very similar to that. It just lets you kind of combine different pieces of prompts to get to the point where you have a prompt that can generate a relatively good image when it comes to generative AI image creation. And then finally, the OpenAI ChatGPT integration, which we'll get to at the very end. So that's the bad side of things. Notice most of them are in the images. The images are the things that mostly sort of turned me off in this keynote. But the good side of things, I'm not sure whether it makes up for it or not. Let's start with some of the writing features. Rewriting, condensing, summarizing are things that it seems like they're going to support pretty robustly at the system level. Notice that this is what I have said that LLMs are good at all along. They're good at summarizing and translating. Notice that there was very little inside of the keynote, if you watched it, where it was creating text from nothing, right? It almost always required you to type something out first, and then it would do the translation to something else or the condensing to something else after the fact, because those are the two things that LLMs are good at. The second one is priority notifications. This seems like maybe it's a combination of several things, but a big part of what was going on inside of their notification story was summarization, and whether those summaries elevated a text or a notification to something that you find important. Photo touch-up. This is one of the few image editing things that I found good in terms of the announcements. I would say that there's a lot of discussion about what this means for the what is a photo crowd out there, and discussion of philosophically what does this mean for the nature of capturing reality in a photo. What is a photo apocalypse is coming for those who are participating. But ultimately, I think that these kind of touch-up features are relatively benign, something that people would do anyways, and democratizing them, making them more accessible to people is never a bad thing in that regard. Natural language search, pretty much universally a good thing. It's better for the system to know what you mean rather than what you said. And so if you're broadening someone's search to incorporate things that are related to what they actually searched for example, I think Microsoft used the example of searching for something that is peacock, and they looked for things that were blue. Well, ultimately, I think that is a good thing. Sorry, I'm breezing through these, but we've got a bigger fish to fry here. Then finally, in Notes and Phone, having the recording and transcribing features, of course, are things that, well, first of all, they're going to affect me a lot, so I think that they're great, and I think that there's no way that is necessarily going to be a downgrade in any regard. So I think that those are all good features. Now for the meat. When it comes to Siri, this was the big question about whether they would do anything about it and what they could do. Now, remember, all of these features were just announced. I don't think anybody's played with them yet. I'm downloading them on my phone as we speak, as far as what is included in the developer beta. But my instant reaction to Siri is that's about what I expected, and I'm impressed that they pulled it off, right? The best word to describe the new Siri is orchestration. Siri has this understanding at a system level about what is going on inside your phone, how you use it, who you are, and what the context is that's available to it. So given all of that context about your life, your data, and everything that's on your device, being able to orchestrate those things with a small prompt that you give it is much easier for the LLM and the AI system as a whole, right? It's not just hallucinating things out of nowhere, because it's taking everything from the context, taking your command, translating it into the available actions that are available, and then coming back with a result and giving you that result for you to verify. This is basically exactly what I said would probably happen when it came to AI with Siri. It's just impressive that they were able to do it so quickly, and in my opinion, jump ahead so quickly. I don't think there's anything else out there that even comes close to what Siri is able to do right now, again, with the asterisk, as long as it works. And that's because Apple is building on a long history of supporting developers and providing APIs to developers that are already going to work to some extent out of the box with this thing. It just is an upgrade to the pre-existing, pretty poor technologies that are out there, implemented in a way that provides a paradigm shift from only graphical user interface to graphical user interface and large language model, basically. One way to think about it is the graphical user interface and the neural user interface, or the artificial intelligence user interface, right? Another important thing that Apple has done is it seems like they've created a new database on the phone called the semantic index. This is the same thing that Microsoft did with Windows, and I found that it fascinating that both these companies went in the same direction. It's unsurprising though, right? The idea of the semantic index is that all of the data that you store on your phone should be stored in a way that is more in line with the way that your brain works as a human, rather than the way that the computer thinks about things. And so while it will still store that data, it's storing it in a way that groups things almost conceptually. And so when it does that, it provides Siri the ability to go and look at that context about what you're asking for contextually about things that have happened in your life, and then feed that into the large language model and give you back a result that actually is useful to you. And remember, this is built on the backs of developers. This is built on the back of iOS, macOS, iPadOS, all of these pre-existing efforts that have been around for a very long time. And pairing it with this semantic index and a set of developer actions with intents, and allows all of that context to be provided for a small little command from a human to provide a amplified output. Siri is finally going to become a superhuman interface. Again, I'm just going to say it over and over, as long as they deliver on what they promised. And trust me, you'll hear from me as we learn more. So that's Siri. That's my feelings about what's going on. I think that Siri really does genuinely bring Apple to the forefront. I don't think that there's anyone even close. They're now treating OpenAI as a component provider, and they even kind of mentioned that in the keynote. They're the best one out there right now, and so that's why they chose them. It would be the same as Apple buying a processor from Intel or Motorola back in the day and using those as underlying technology to build the Apple II or the Mac. OpenAI is now at the component level, and I think this is an indication that when it comes to the consumer space, AI is most likely going to become a commodity and a component to the larger whole of a system, rather than a platform unto its own. Mostly because Apple has seized on this technology opportunity, and as long as it's implemented well, is now at the forefront. So that brings us all the way back over to the bad column one more time, which is this OpenAI ChatGPT integration, which, if you give a confirmation, sends it over to ChatGPT and then allows it to kind of interact with things. I thought it was really funny that throughout the keynote, when they would show the data from Siri not being able to hand something and then it being handled by ChatGPT, they would say, let me see the exact text. They said, I guess I'm not going to be able to find it. Oh, check important info for mistakes when I sent it over to ChatGPT. So that's the difference between the Apple intelligence, as they're calling it, and the sort of generalized artificial intelligence, right? They're putting that brand on it because they think that it is capable. But it seems weird that they're opening that door to this world of things that is less capable, or at least lower quality, and making that easily accessible to users. It's just very bizarre to me. And that's why I started this video talking about discipline. I would say that on the good column, when it comes to Siri, the rewriting features, the priority notifications, the photo touch-up, natural language search, recording and transcribing, all of those things are disciplined uses of technology, right? That is Apple's taste coming into play. They know that if they're going to put their brand on it, it has to have a certain level of quality output. And I knew that they would be able to take the profound technology that is artificial intelligence and create good products with it at the beginning, right? But what I didn't necessarily think that they do is feel the pressure to add these other features which are lower quality. All of those generative images, it just seems weird and un-Apple-y and lower quality to me. And it just seems shoehorned in because it provides the perception that they're caught up, even though, again, I think that the good side of things shows that they're far enough already. And then, of course, the GPT, the open door to the ChatGPT thing through Siri, I would say that is slightly disciplined. They make it sure that you get a confirmation from the user that they want to send their private data over to OpenAI. But I think that's a slippery slope in a lot of ways for a lot of users, that they won't even really know what that means, and they'll send things over. And then of course you have to rely on OpenAI to, protect your data in the way that Apple has, shown with their brand promise. Maybe that was one of the conditions of them partnering. I don't know. It just seems weird to me. I'll close with this, which is one way to think about this is to break things down into the user interface, the sort of action or system model, and then the data, right? The data, when it comes to the architecture, is that semantic index. The action level is the intents that developers are creating that allows Siri it gives Siri hands, basically. It lets Siri do things. And then finally, the large language model, which is the UI layer. And that is the level at which Siri is able to speak to you, hear from you, give you feedback, provide interaction capabilities and things like that. And because the app model the apps on the iPhone are already so robust as an ecosystem, it's going to run into fewer of those scenarios where Siri can say, oh, I just can't do that necessarily. At least that would be my prediction. The final thing I'll say is that if you look at the history of the processors that have existed in computers, one way to think about that is in terms of what they represented about what they can do. The very first one was a CPU, right? It processed the computations. That's all it did, right? And we hacked a command line interface on top of that to do those computations quickly. Then the user interface, the graphical user interface came along, right? And that became such, images and graphics became such an important part of the human interface with the computer that was reflected in the chips at the very base layer of the computer, right? That's when we got the GPU. So we have a CPU and a GPU. And for many years, those were the two columns that we sort of propped up all of our computing on. Now, as we end up with more user interface that involves natural language processing, artificial intelligence, large language models, the more important that third category of chips is going to become, the NPUs, the neural processing units, right? The first one was just the core of the computer, the CPU. The second one, the GPU, allowed us to create a more accessible device for users and brought the computer to the rest of us. This last one is going to take that to its logical conclusion. Many, many years ago, Steve Jobs once said that as technology progresses, as computers get more advanced, more and more and more of those compute cycles that are involved, more of the processing power of a computer is going to be used to adapt the computer to the human, rather than forcing the human to adapt to the computer. And now the sheer number of chips that are on a computer meant to help the computer understand the human almost outweigh the number of chips that are used for the human to understand the computer, if that makes sense. I've been working on a video on that. It's not a fully formed thought yet, but I think that those three chips and the progression of how those have come along is an interesting insight into kind of where we're headed. Anyways, thanks for watching. This is just another meditation. I would love to hear more of your comments. It has inspired so much of what I've covered recently. And I do think that we are in for a very paradigm shifting week here, if not having already seen some of that. So like I said, thanks for watching. I'll be trying to post a video at least once a day, every day this week. And so I'll see you tomorrow.